Hey and welcome to Neverwinter with Aragon. In this video I'd like to go over all the race changes that will occur with the upcoming combat rework. With the entire rework we have got a change to our ratings, and as such we now have got a change to a good few of the different racial bonuses. So let's go ahead and see these actual changes and whether or not the current races on the live server will still be the best for your role when these changes come about. And on top of this we shall discuss whether or not alternative races are now better than the ones that are current. So first things first, here I am on the previous server with the entirety of the different changes to these races. Initially on human, you can see here now it will only give us 1% to all of our ratings, offense and defensive stats, and thus we are actually gaining a total of 10% here. However, they are spread out across all of the different ratings, and as such we won't gain the full benefit when we are, let's say, a healer. Looking on the live server here, all that it has really changed is instead of giving 250 points to all of our ratings, it now gives 1% to all of our ratings, making the human have got a buff. Moving on, we jump to the half-orc. How has this changed? Well, it really hasn't. It remains with its 5% bonus to the critical severity, and it remains with the ability scores and the swift charge, as you can see right here. Now we move on to the wood elf. It now gives us a total of 5% to our critical strike, our caps now being 90%, meaning this is actually a significant bonus. As it was before, it gave us a total of 1500 critical strike, so 5% is again a huge buff here. Next we move on to the Sun Elf. All it really did is it got a 3% buff to its action point gain. It used to be a 2% here, and now it's a total of 5%. Let's move on to the Dwarf. Again, similarly, it also got a buff. It now gives a bonus of 5% defense, whereas before it only gave 2000 defense. Moving on to the Halfling, it got a buff there up to 5% deflect, where it was as before a 1500 to its deflect rating, and the other abilities remain the same. Moving on to the half-elf, it gained a buff of 1 extra ability score on this bonus, and it also gained a buff here where it converted again. Instead of having plus rating here, it now gives 3% to crit severity and deflect. And here is how it was before, where it had that 1500 deflect instead. And we move to the tiefling, and the tiefling pretty much remains the same. Again, it still has that plus 5% extra damage, and then its Infernal Wrath was buffed up, so now it reduces the damage of all targets' attacks by 5%, up from what it was of 2.5%. So overall the tiefling is a pretty decent race for dealing extra damage to targets below half health, that additional flat 5%. But we'll see how it compares to, let's say, like the Dragonborn, which used to be the best. Moving on to the Drow. Again, like the other races, they have converted basically the rating buff to now a percentage buff, whereas the defense used to be 2000 here, it's now 5%. And it gained a buff here of honed defenses, giving it 5% deflect severity, whereas before it had this pretty useless trance, where it would increase hit point regeneration when out of combat. Now we move to, let's say, the premium races, and yes, we'll jump to the metallic Ancestry Dragonborn first. The metallic Ancestry Dragonborn used to be the famed best in slot race, and is it still now? Well, it still gives the same bonus of 3% to your incoming healing and a 3% to your maximum hit points. Along with that, still gives the bonus of the extra ability scores, and it gives now, instead of just 3% extra damage, it now gives 3% to your critical strike and 3% to your power, as it was before here, giving that 1500 critical strike and 3% increased overall damage. Now the 3% increased overall damage by far outweighs the 3% additional power. However, it got a buff there to 3000 critical strike, and the critical strike chance now being up to that 90%, meaning this is a decent buff. But does it overall compare, let's say, having 3% to critical strike and 3% to power? Does it compare to, let's say, having a buff of 5% to your overall damage against targets below half health? Well, against single target boss fights, this 5% additional damage can be quite a lot and can be slightly better than the Metallic Ancestry Dragonborn additional stats, but this is mainly on a DPS class like the Rogue Assassin, where you have Gloaming Cut, where you can deal more damage the lower the amount of health of the enemy, and thus you would gain this extra 5% on top of that, meaning you would gain even more damage, and you would probably be better off using a Tiefling than your Metallic Ancestry Dragonborn. And there are other classes out there that also benefit from dealing more damage when a target's health is lower. But other than that, the Metallic Ancestry Dragonborn overall, if you're fully capped out on your stats, if of course you're actually using the Dragonborn stats to cap those stats, will give a 3% extra buff to damage, and this I'm sure is calculated by the developer team, as that is exactly the amount that it would have given before. So if you have any lower stats than being capped, then this bonus is even higher, and thus you would benefit from it more, and therefore the Metallic Ancestry Dragonborn does beat the Tiefling's 5% extra damage when the target's below half health. And with the Metallic Ancestry Dragonborn still having that additional hit points, makes it still pretty much the best for endgame. However, do we have a contender? Let's go to the Gith. The Gith now gained a bonus where it has Gith advantage, giving it plus 5% combat advantage. Plus 5% combat advantage is pretty much like plus 5% power, as long as you can maintain that combat advantage damage 100% of the time by making sure you're flanking your enemies, making it that the Gith is a very competitive contender, especially since combat advantage can be harder to cap it out. So now you can pretty much just choose to have a Gith for an endgame DPS if you wanted, and the only thing you would be penalized on is you would not have the extra hit points. So now let's move to the ordinary Dragonborn. Similarly to the Metallic, it has that 3% critical strike and 3% power, just a little bit lesser powerful as it doesn't have the 3% to maximum hit points. Moving to the Aasimar. Now there is a tooltip error on the Aasimar. This is supposed to be 2% buff to your power, outgoing healing, incoming healing, defense, and maximum hit points. This is supposed to be 2%, making it very competitive instead of having a Metallic Ancestry Dragonborn where you would have the 3%. So for supports like tanks and healers, this is still one of the best races, as it will grant your party members 2% extra hit points. This used to be only 1%, as we can see over here. It used to only give 1% to all of these attributes, and only grant a 1% buff to nearby party members. So both of these have been buffed up to 2%. Again, this is a tooltip error and is supposed to say 2%. So yes, the Aasimar race will still be one of the best for supports to buff your party's hit points, and for healers still being the best there, giving that 2% extra outgoing healing, along with increasing that power. Moving on to the Moon Elf. Again, not much has changed here. Instead of having a 1% buff to action points and stamina regen, it now has a 3%. So it just got a little buff. And finally we go to the Menzoberranzan Renegade. Now again, this drow got a buff to its bonuses, where instead of reducing the enemy's defense by 1500 rating, it now decreases it by 3%. And reduces their overall attacks by 3% instead of 2.5%, as we can see here. And its trance also got removed and again has been replaced by its honed defenses, giving that extra 5% deflect severity. So that's pretty much all of the races and the changes. Now you'd ask, what's best for a tank? Well, currently a Dwarf is pretty good. However, with the change to the actual way that the defense stat works now, you are most likely better off with just stacking more hit points from the Metallic Ancestry Dragonborn. Alternatively, you could also go with the Aasimar. However, all of these races are premium. So if you wanted to go tank spec with one of these free races, you'd probably best off choosing either the half-elf, depending on what actual bonus this gives, depending on your class, the extra ability scores. You could try get that in Constitution to give you more hit points. Or yeah, you could just go with the Dwarf and you'd have that bonus of resistance against knocks and pushes, which can be decent. And having that 5% extra defense means it'll be a whole lot easier to cap out that defense, giving that little extra survivability. And that's pretty much it. So the meta really hasn't changed much. Still, Metallic Ancestry Dragonborn, one of the best for DPS. However, now we have a contender, the Gith, giving that 5% extra combat advantage. And also now the buff from the Tiefling, the 5% additional damage against targets when they're below half HP, is now more competitive as well, due to the fact it's pretty much the only racial bonus there that will actually give overall percentage bonus to damage. However, of course, it's situationally good, as when you're running content where you literally just one-shot everything, then this 5% is pretty useless. And for the meta on tanking, you're still wanting to go with the Metallic Ancestry Dragonborn for just more hit points. And for healing, you're still going to want to go with the Azumar, or pretty much any race which gives you more ability scores to your wisdom. So yeah, that's it for this video. The overall changes and what's going to occur to the races. You guys really shouldn't be too worried, as your race is still going to remain pretty much the same, if not getting a little buff here or there. However, of course, with the regards to Dragonborns no longer gaining the extra 3% overall damage, it is kind of a nerf. However, they make up for it having 3% additional power and critical strike, both being pretty useful, especially since the caps are now 90% and it's very hard to get them fully capped out like that. So hopefully I presented this well, and if I did, consider leaving the video a like, and if you're new around here, consider subscribing, and we'll see you guys around. Goodbye for now.